Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Reality Reimagined, Subversive Women in Speculative Fiction. I'm really excited to be here with everyone. My name is Georgina Marie Guardado. I'm the marketing director for Aunt Lute, and we're so excited to be with three amazing authors tonight celebrating the release of books from Gwendolyn Paradice, Jennifer Maritza McCauley, and Rebecca Roanhorse. So we are going to get started. I am going to just share a little bit about how the night will go. My colleague Isis is here tonight and will be moderating the chat, so please feel free to interact in the chat. You can post Q&As or questions in the Q&A function. We'll have some time for an audience questionnaire later. So we will go through some introductions. We'll hear an excerpt reading from everyone here tonight. We'll go through a little bit of a guided conversation, and then we'll have an audience Q&A at the end. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function, like I said, and then we'll get started. So tonight we're celebrating the release of The Divining Season by Gwendolyn Paradice, which is so gorgeous, and I have it right here with me. And Neon Steel by Jennifer Maritza McCauley, which I also have, and I'm so excited to have in my hands. And River of Bones and Other Stories by Rebecca Roanhorse, also have from my local library, which is exciting. This virtual event will feature a reading and a panel discussion with these lovely authors. And I do want to go through and just share the bios of all the authors here at the top, and then we'll go into some readings. So Gwendolyn Paradice is a queer, disabled Cherokee Caucasian writer of fiction and nonfiction, a 2024 National Endowment for the Arts Fellow. They're also the author of the Hudson Prize winning short story collection, More Enduring for Having Been Broken. It's a great title. As well as chapbook co-authored with poet Kara Doris, Carnival Bound, or Please Unwrap Me, also a great title. Their creative work has been nominated for Pushcarts, Best American Essays, and Best of the Net, and their short stories and essays can be found in Booth, Zone 3, Crab Orchard Review, Tin House Online, the Journal of America Folklore, and others. They retain a PhD from the University of Missouri, an MFA from Bennington College, and MA and BA degrees from the University of North Texas, north of Dallas, where they were born and raised. Welcome, Gwendolyn. We're excited to have you. And then we have Jennifer Maritza McCauley, set in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Oh, that's your book description. You are an acclaimed author of When Trying to Return Home 2023, which was a New York Times Editor's Choice, Best Fiction Book of the Year by Kirkus Reviews, and a must-read by Elle, Latinx in Publishing, Miss Magazine, and Southern Review of Books. A former National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, she is a assistant professor of English at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. We're glad you're here too, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. And lastly, Rebecca Roanhorse is a New York Times bestselling and Nebula, Hugo, and Locus award-winning speculative fiction writer. She has published multiple award-winning short stories and novels, including 2 novels and a novella in the Sixth World series and the Hugo award-winning epic fantasy trilogy, Between Earth and Sky. She was the guest editor of America's Best Science Fiction and Fantasy and a contributor to the New York Times 100 Best Books of the 21st Century. She also writes for Marvel Comics and Games. That's amazing. And her TV includes FX A Murder at the End of the World and Marvel series Echo for Disney Plus and Netflix adult series animation. She has had her own work optioned by Paramount, Amazon Studios, Netflix, and AMC Studios. That's incredible. Thanks for being here, Rebecca. So I'd love to get started with reading so that everyone can hear some of your work. Rebecca, would you want to start us off for anywhere in like 8 to 10 minutes reading?
Sure. So I'm going to read from River of Bones. This is actually a collection of short stories and then one novella. I've been writing for about 8 years, and my very first short story, Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience Trademark, is in here, as well as sort of a curated list of all the short stories I've written since then. So I felt like this book is sort of the accumulation of the first 8 years of my career. Um, this is actually from the Sixth World series, the picture or the characters from there, and that is the novella. However, I'm going to read to you from the short stories today. I was trying to decide if I wanted to read from Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience Trademark, which I've been doing, or my Black Girls in the Southwest in the 1880s. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if anybody has any preferences. And since When I have that much time, maybe I'll just choose. So I'm actually, I think, going to choose Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience. Trademark. So this was the first story I ever wrote. In the great American Indian novel, when it is finally written, all of the white people will be Indians, and all of the Indians will be ghosts. You maintain a menu of a half dozen experiences on your digital blackboard, but Vision Quest is the one the tourists choose the most. That certainly makes your workday easy. All a Vision Quest requires is a dash of mystical shaman, a spirit animal, wolf usually, but birds of prey are on the upswing this year, and the approximation of a peyote experience. Tourists always come out of the experience feeling spiritually transformed. You've never actually tried peyote, but you did smoke weed. You did smoke your share of weed during that 1 year at Arizona State, and who's going to call you on the difference? It's all 101 stuff, really, these quests, but no other Indian working at Sedona Sweats can do it better. Your sales numbers are tops. Your wife, Teresa, doesn't approve of the gig. Oh, she likes you working, especially after that dismal stretch of unemployment the year before last when she almost left you, but she thinks the job itself is demeaning. Our last name's not Trueblood, she complains when you tell her about your nom de rev. Nobody wants to buy a vision quest from a Jesse Turnblatt, you explain. I need to sound more Indian. You are Indian, she says. Turnblatt's Indian sounding enough because you're already Indian. We're not the right kind of Indian, you counter. I mean, we're Catholic, for Christ's sake. What Teresa doesn't understand is that tourists don't want a real Indian experience. They want what they see in the movies. And who can blame them? Movie Indians are terrific. So you watch the same movies the tourists do until John Dunbar becomes your spirit animal and stands with a fist your best girl. You memorize Johnny Depp's lines from The Lone Ranger and hang a picture of Iron Eyes Cody in your work locker. For a while, you are really into Dustin Hoffman's Little Big Man. It's Little Big Man that does you in. For a week in June, you convince your boss to offer a Custer's Last Stand special, thinking there might be a tourist or two who want to live out a crazy horse experience. You even memorize some quotes attributed to the Venerable Sioux chief that you find on the internet. You plan to make it real authentic. But you don't get a single taker. Your numbers nosedive. Management in Phoenix notices, and boss drops it from the blackboard by 4th of July weekend. He yells at you to stop screwing around, accuses you of trying to be an artiste or whatnot. Tourists don't come to Sedona Sweats to live out a goddamn battle, boss says in the break room over lunch one day, especially if the white guy loses. They come here to find themselves. Boss waves his hand in the air in an approximation of something vaguely prayer like. It's a spiritual experience we're offering. Top quality. The fucking best. Daran, your Navajo coworker with the pretty smile and the perfect teeth, snorts loudly. She takes a bite of her sandwich, mutton by the looks of it. Her jaw works. Her sharp teeth flash white. She waits until she's finished chewing to say, nothing spiritual about squaw fantasy. Squaw Fantasy is Boss's latest idea, his way to get the numbers up and impress management. Daran and a few others have complained about the use of the ugly slur, the inclusion of a sexual fantasy as an experience at all. But Boss is unmoved, especially when the first week's numbers roll in. Biggest seller yet. Boss looks at you. What do you think? Boss is Pima, with a bushy mustache and a thick head of still dark hair. You admire that about him. Virility. Boss makes being a man look easy. Makes everything look easy. Real, authentic like. Daran tilts her head, long beaded earrings swinging, and waits. Her painted nails click click impatiently against the Formica lunch table. You can smell the onion in her sandwich. Your mouth is dry like the red rock desert you can see outside your window. If you say squaw fantasy is demeaning, boss will mock you, call you a pussy, or worse. If you say you think it's okay, Daran and her crew will put you on the guys who are assholes list, and you'll deserve it. You sip your bottled water, stalling. Decide that in the wake of the Crazy Horse debacle, that boss's approval means more than Daran's. And venture, if the tourists like it. Boss slaps the table triumphant. Daran's face twists in disgust. What does Teresa think of that, eh, Jesse? She spits at you. You tell her boss is thinking of adding Savage Braves to the menu. Next, he's gonna have you in a loincloth and hair down to your ass. See how you like it. Your face heats up, embarrassed. You push away from the table too quickly and the flimsy top teeters. You can hear Boss's shouts of protest as his vending machine lemonade tilts dangerously, and Daran's mocking laugh. But it's all coming to your ears through a shroud of thick cotton. You mumble something about getting back to work. The sound of arguing trails you down the hall. You change in the locker room and shuffle down to the pod marked with your name. You unlock the hatch and crawl in. Some people find the pods claustrophobic, but you like the cool metal container, the tight fit. It's comforting. The VR helmet fits snugly on your head, the breathing mask over your nose and mouth. With a shiver of anticipation, you give the pod your experience settings. Add the other necessary details to flesh things out. The screen prompts you to pick a tourist connection from a waiting list, but you ignore it, blinking through the option screens until you get to the final confirmation. You brace for the mild nausea that always comes when you relocate in and out of an experience. The first sensation is always smell. Sweetgrass and wood smoke and the rich loam of the northern plains. Even though it's fake, receptors firing under the coaxing of a machine, you relax into the scents. You grew up in the desert among people who appreciate cedar and pinon and red earth, but there's still something homelike about this prairie place. Or maybe you watch too much TV. You really aren't sure anymore. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Mhm.
Um, our attendees, please feel free to utilize the chat or your reactions in response to the readings. I'm sure the authors would love to hear your comments. And selfishly, I'm really excited that you read that story
Oh,
um,
good.
for
Yeah,
for personal reasons, but I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
also a good example of subversion in fiction, and especially we'll go into conversations, of course, later, and I won't take over the time, but just talking about the authentic Indian experience that others expect. That stood
Excellent.
out. Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca. Jennifer, would you like to read next?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to read a bit of Flash from Neon Steel. And it's an interconnected linked short story collection, sometimes called a hybrid collection, in which each chapter is an episode a la anime. So anime is a big part of this book. But this first story takes place in Sharpsburg and Pittsburgh, and it's from a high school girl's point of view. The girl in the bomba dress. Adrian was late. She hated being late, but here she was late for Algebra 2, and she wasn't going to embarrass herself in front of all those white kids. What would they say? Dumb girl from Sharpsburg, of course she's nothing. Or their eyes would do all the gibbering. Pinpoints and spitfire, that's what they give her. Who cared either way? She ran from her place on Chapman Street fast, faster than she normally ran, her backpack slamming up and down her little back and causing her red pain. As she was running past trash-thick cans and darkened bars and new coffee shops bright and yanking folks in for heavy caffeine, she thought about how all she needed to do was get to homeroom. She could be quiet. Nobody would notice her if she blended in and said nothing. So, that just went on. She just had to get there. They all knew her. After all, she was the only black girl in the school outside of Tiana, and they knew Adri as the one who always did school right. But here she was, late. Halfway through Adri's sprint down the high-stacked, rust-red buildings, she heard a grunt. It was a woman's grunt, and it was stark enough that Adri stopped in her tracks, thinking someone was hurt. She turned around and approached the alley behind her, black and garbage filled, the cans drooping with shit and pizza. She walked past the alleyway toward an opening flanked by a wall of graffitied brick. A mural of black folks wearing purple, looking royal, smothered the alleyway. In the center of the open space, there was a young woman, a little older, but not much more than Adri's 16 years. She had long hair and fluffing curls. She wore an ivory dress that crimped and flew as she danced. Her eyes were closed. She was meditating, meditating, her muscles tensing, tensing. She sang Bambula, Bambula. Adri stared at this girl, not knowing exactly what to say, and while she was trying to gauge how fast she should run to class, the little girl's eyes snapped open and she saw Adri. "Who are you?" she said. What?" Adri whispered. She could tell this Bomba girl was beautiful, her body bronzed and blazing. The Bomba girl could be a terrifying stranger, but Adri felt soft around this girl. What was she doing in the alley in the middle of Pittsburgh, of all places? "Where are you going?" the Bomba girl asked gently, her voice deeper than whatever young age she was. "To school," Adri gulped. "Aren't you in school?" "No," she said. "I work deep in the night. I practice bomba in the day, preparing myself." "For what?" She turned back to her swishing work, spread her hands out, she shook them. The bangles on her wrist clanged and clacked. "You do this without drums?" Adrian asked. Her family in Puerto Rico would bomba sometimes. She knew you couldn't flail and shake without a good beat. She pressed her hand against her chest. "It's in here." "I don't believe that. That's very American, to be so cynical." Adrian shrugged. "Girl, I'm a junior. I'm just trying to get into college." She smiled, a half grin, and went back to the quick work of moving her hands about. "Okay," the girl said, in that unnervingly Dirk voice, and Adrian didn't know what to do with her. "That's your path." "This is a sacred art," Adrian opined. "Why do you do it?" "Girl," she mimicked Adrian and swept her hands out. "Aren't you a sacred art?" Adrian's face said, "What the fuck?" And it was true. She didn't value herself at all. She was just a high school girl from Sharpsburg with nothing to her name, but a bunch of slurs hurled at her face. And here was this gorgeous girl telling her about how she was something beautiful. "I guess I am." "Say it with your chest, Mommy." "I want to do what you do, freely," she said. Then she said it with her chest, another cliche. "Puedo hacer cualquier cosa." "Ole say," the girl tried, in a language Adrian didn't know, and as she spun around, Adrian saw her own face in that spinning. "There you go," the girl said gently. She stopped dancing and came over and tugged at the belt around Adri's waist. "Me quiero tal como soy." She reached out and clutched her hands. Adrian remembered she had homeroom, but as she gripped her heated fingers back, she suddenly didn't care. They could say what they wanted. She stretched her back, and Adrian stretched hers. They were dancing, 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 African Boricua music, taking them to palm-treed places they'd never been, in Pittsburgh's aching center, not worried about the time. Oh, so this is a short excerpt from the first story called Afro Otaku. I hadn't been back to the mills, a brown flushed abandoned mall atop the crooked elbow of Blawnox Mountain, since I'd graduated from high school. My gap year after my time at Fox Chapel had largely been a bust. I'd been to college for a semester, dropped out, worked a few odd jobs, then ran out of money after the Oakmount caregiving company I worked for went under. I moved back home with my parents and eventually enrolled in the University of Pittsburgh. Since I lived with my parents, my friends were few. I tried starting up conversations in class, but the students largely stuck in friend clusters and stayed to themselves. My first month in school was fine. I studied, I answered questions, I returned home. Nothing large nor grandiose to report. I had one friend who moved away, one pen pal, and some online pals. I'd never had a boyfriend before, though I dreamed of the experience. I read shoujo manga every night and imagined my own Yu Matsura would come and enliven my insipid days at Pitt. He did it. I was vastly lonely. My parents constantly fought at home. My mother even threatened to go back to Puerto Rico. I couldn't concentrate on my schoolwork, so I had to spend my days at Lorien West, gobbling up fictional worlds and comic book panels. I was a solitary nerd. My high school friends, fellow social outcasts, had gone to various other colleges, and I was the only one left in Pittsburgh. One day on campus, I saw a poster for Anime World, a new store opening at the Mills. It was about 10 minutes away from me on O'Hara, where my parents lived, and I nearly salivated thinking about the new issues of manga I would buy and how convenient the place was to me. I borrowed my mom's taupe Subaru and drove up to the Mills, excited for a little snatch of escapism within my grasp. When I entered the once flourishing mall, I was immediately taken by its emptiness. A rush of dead air struck me when I walked through the sliding doors. There was a Borders that used to be thriving, and a Walden Books that used to be compete with the Borders, and there was a Rue 21 and a Macy's and a J.C. Penney, all flashing staples of commercialism now whisked away. The only stores remaining were mom and pop places, the arcade, a Christmas shop that stayed open all year, and a place that sold terrifying baby dolls. And now, apparently, Anime World. And I'll stop right there, but actually, as it keeps going, the character will end up meeting other anime nerds, and then they all end up being in their own kind of anime. But that's the first one. All right, thanks, y'all.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. I love the throwback to Borders. That had me reminiscing, feeling nostalgic for the old bookstores. Yeah, thanks so much. I think it's another great example of subversion in fiction, pushing against the societal expectations of beauty in the first excerpt that you read, and then also just embracing art, whether it's anime or literature and whatnot. So thank you for reading. Gwendolyn, would you like to read?
Sure. Thank you, Georgina. And I just want to say thank you to Rebecca and Jennifer for sharing this evening with me. I have taught your short fiction in my workshops before, and it's really neat to be here reading alongside you. And I also want to acknowledge, that we're just a few days past May 5th, which is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And the divining season is deeply invested in, really acknowledging that our country and other countries have an issue with this. So I'm going to just contextualize it because this is a novel, unlike the short fiction. This novel takes place in the 1950s in a small town in Texas named Larissa. And Larissa was a real town, and the closest site to the 1838 Kila massacre, where local Cherokee killed white settlers after a treaty dispute about land. Today, Larissa doesn't exist. It's unincorporated land after a decline starting in like the late 1800s. But this book imagines a version of Larissa that continued to grow instead of dying out. And in this Larissa, what happened back in time with the Kila massacre underpins the story. And the story begins with Gracie Howard. She moves back to Larissa after more than a decade of being gone. She returns with her daughter, Emily, who is Cherokee, adopted by Gracie, who has pretty much cleaved Emily from her culture and heritage. And the two move into Larissa's notorious Cedar House. It's the site of a murder-suicide from decades prior. Shortly after moving in, a local girl goes missing, and the town kind of goes on a paranoid lockdown after learning this young girl is actually not the most recent girl to go missing. She is the first white girl to go missing. Prior to her, there were 3 Native American girls who also went missing, and reports about them were pretty much ignored by the local police. So this book alternates between the 5 perspectives of women whose lives are kind of spiderwebbed by place and history. And the book is divided into 5 sections. Each section begins with a plural ancestral voice. And this is where I will start, the beginning of section 1, Descending a Spiraled Portent. Girls appear and disappear, but so do women. We know this because blood talks to blood. Since Larissa is welling with new, old blood, since the scent of blood is past and present and future. We find each other, the women who have been misplaced, separated, given to the bright dawn, to stars, to the falling from night into dawn, to the quiet, to the gone. The opposite of copper-locked is memory. We are remembering something. We are remembering the sun on our backs, the flies on our arms, the dead toes on our feet. We are remembering the needles made of bone and the voices of women who have disappeared. We are remembering a girl who once fled from us, who became one of us, who dropped her tongue and stitched another in its place. Blood is calling to blood. We find the memory of blood along the riverbanks and the grasslands buried under concrete. We open our mouths and drop dust and sand and dirt while we search for other lost women. And then I'm going to skip ahead really quick. I'm going to move on and read just a little bit from Emily's first chapter, the little girl. She's the only character in the book that has a first person point of view. And in this first chapter, Emily has learned about the murder-suicide that happened in the house that she's moved into. And she's beginning to see her ancestors who have sought her out and come into the house. I'm going to collapse two sections together. And both of these sections lean into conversations about storytelling, which is a meta conversation in the book. Little girls disappear. This is what I learned from the book Miss Habermeyer gave me. There is no longer a Mr. Habermeyer, and there were no little Habermeyers to grow into big Habermeyers, so the book is mine. And I have never read a book with so many missing girls, but they're here all through the pages. Little girls losing themselves in the woods, little girls following strange men to other towns, never to be seen again. Little girls going up with the smoke because of wicked stepmothers who burned them for their beauty. Little girls are locked in dungeons and starving because people forget that they're there. They are eaten by animals, falling from high windows. Little girls hearing voices singing and leaving their homes during full moons. Little girls traveling long distances and freezing in snow between towns, drowning in lakes, taken by elves, fairies, and brownies. Little girls whose mothers are left weeping at empty cradles. I read these stories while mother is washing dishes, while neighbors knock at the door and talk to her, handing over casseroles and inspecting how the house has changed, saying things like, "Good thing you could see past it," or "I still wonder what really happened to the Gladwells." I read these stories after mother has gone to bed by the light of the lamp in my turret bedroom overlooking the street. Sometimes the stories creep along my arms and make me feel cold even though I sweat. Sometimes they whisper to me to turn out of my shell, risk the taking of an extra step towards understanding. Sometimes I think the stories are trying to tell me something about what people say and don't say, what they're willing to reveal, and what they choose to keep hidden, even from themselves. Each night, I turn off the ceiling fan, and in the quiet, I hear the drone of cicadas, the crickets chirping. Sometimes I close the book and turn off all the lights and open the window. I think I might be a girl who throws off her skin and grows feathers and flies away, never to be seen again. Tonight, the Texas heat is enough to turn my skin to caramel, tacky and hot. I read a story about a little girl who does not want to grow up. Her friends and family call her Forever Girl because she shirks her impending womanhood, spends her days playing, and refuses to do chores, cooking, cleaning, sewing. Forever Girl fills her days roaming her family's ancestral lands, climbing hillsides and wandering the riverbank and exploring rock caves. This is how she meets the little people. And the little people play hide and seek with her. They leave her small gifts of bundled twigs, colored leaves arranged into little houses, braids of bird feathers. And she leaves them gifts too, sweets from her mother's kitchen, bits of embroidered ribbon, lockets of her hair tied with twine. All is good and well for the Forever Girl until one day her mother declares that she must go to school. She must grow up, find a husband, get married, have children, and learn to take care of those children, which includes doing all the chores Forever Girl doesn't want to do. And so, the night before Forever Girl is set to begin her formal education in womanhood, she says goodbye to the little people. She runs through the hillsides and along the riverbank and on the rock caves, and she calls out to them, "Goodbye, goodbye. I must become a woman now and can no longer come to see you." The little people appear, and they hug her shins and weep and cry and tell her she can stay with them. She could be a Forever Girl. And so she becomes one. I rest the book on the window ledge, finger tracing the illustration of the Forever Girl surrounded by the little people. She has an indiscernible object in one hand and is mid-motion, bending at the knees to gather a few of them into a one-armed hug. No reason is given for her decision to stay. to leave her family behind. This is the kind of story that would bother my mother, one that lacks what she calls connective tissue. But I understand what is private must be held close, lest we give too much of ourselves away to others. There is a risk in opening too deeply because every opening is also an entrance. The branches of the cedar tree growing wide against the side of the house rustle, and I look up. I squint at the yard, pull myself away from the window, and put my hands against the glass, ready to slide it down. Ooh. The packets of green needles part, and from the tangled darkness emerges a small owl, hopping along the arm of the cedar tree, its head low on its shoulders, jutting forward like a stooped old man. The light from my room reflects in its eyes, and it ruffles its feathers, turning its head. Ooh, ooh. Who? I ask. You, it says. And then I can sense them in the room, the women in yellow. The owl stares at me, twisting its head, blinking its eyes. Remember, the women whisper. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Gwendolyn. That was beautiful. I think I can speak for some of our staff are here in the audience as well, and this is our latest release from Aunt Lute Books, and so I know everyone's been immersed in the production of it and the story, and it's exciting to see it come out into the world. Yeah. And I'm tuning in from Upper Lake, California today, a small rural town in Northern California. We just had our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Festival and acknowledgement event that happens annually here. And there's a beautiful mural just down the road of one of the missing women in our community. So I'm appreciate you acknowledging it and also writing this important story about all of the women. So thank you. Thank you all for those wonderful readings. For our audience, please feel free to continue writing in the chat. We're going to move into some guided conversation. I'm going to spotlight everyone for this part. And so I put together 5 questions for our guided conversation, and then we'll move on to audience Q&A. So please feel free to begin thinking of your questions for our audience. You can put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A function. Okay, so the first question I have for all of you is going to be for all 3 of you. Your books are now out in the world. It's so exciting. I'm curious how it feels for each of you to have these stories published and now in the books or in the hands of all of your readers.
I'll just jump in. It's weird, right? To have a books go out. I think writing is such a solitary process, or it can be. And then to all of a sudden enter into conversation with others about what you've written and the process of putting it together and publication is super vulnerable, right? Like I don't like self-promotion, although I do love to talk about writing and I love to talk about other people's writing. But it's just been really wonderful to have people reach out to me on social media and through the university in my local community, expressing interest in this book and excitement about the book. And I've kind of been overwhelmed by it. And that's been kind of neat.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you so much, Gwen, and it's so great to hear you, Rebecca. And thank you so much, everyone who's on Aunt Lute and has put so much time into this event. Yeah, so the stories that I wrote for this collection, I had been thinking about since I was in high school, and I had to go through life to kind of actually live to figure out how to write them. So that meant a lot to me when the book got picked up. And then I was really excited to kind of what Gwen was saying, that I was excited to see other folks' reactions, to see reactions that I didn't expect. I mean, whenever you release a book, well, for me, when I release a book, I'm just like, oh no, I don't know what's going to happen. But so, um, so when it happens and it goes well, or folks just say anything to you, it's not even just nice, but they just say anything that kind of implies that they read the book with care. It just means the entire universe. So yeah, I definitely just feel extremely grateful right
Yeah, so I've written like 9 novels, I think. I'm not sure anymore. And I'm constantly writing a novel, so it just feels like I'm in this like never-ending loop. In a good way. But the short story collection is, like I said before, sort of like a retrospective. Like it feels like for me to kind of look back at what I've been doing, the short work, the short fiction that I've been writing from the beginning. And it was really interesting because a lot of these stories, I kind of barely remembered them. When I write something, I think people often, don't realize how long the publication cycle is or the production cycle to get something on the shelves. So by the time a book comes out, it's been like maybe 18 months since I wrote it. And I'm like, I don't know. What is it about? I can't remember. So the short stories, they have a much shorter production schedule, but they feel very long ago. So it was really like a journey of sort of self-rediscovery to look back through these stories and pick which ones we were going to include and to remember, oh yeah, I wrote that, in 2020, and this was what was going on in my head at the time because we're constantly changing as authors, as both of you know, and what interests you now may not interest you in 5 years or what interested you 5 years ago, unless you're Jennifer and you thought about these in high school, may not interest you now. But yeah, so it's just been an adventure. I'm very grateful too that people are even interested in reading my work. But yeah, a lot of fun.
Thanks for sharing. I just saw a series of Instagram reels today, actually, that I was going through of authors like a year from now after they've written their stories, they go back and reread the first chapter and they're like, who wrote this? Not remembering the characters and the plots. Yeah, it's really interesting. So I come to this event as not only from Aunt Lute, but as a poet. That's my craft. And but fiction is my favorite genre to read. So it's really I'm kind of nerding out being able to talk with all of you and have your books here and have read your stories. So some of the questions I put together are just general, not necessarily specific to the craft. Um, on the theme of reality or imagine, can you share a little bit about each of your processes in building the worlds in these three unique books? And how do you feel the worlds you created compare and contrast to the state of the world today?
Um, I guess I can go. It's probably helpful to like pick somebody to go. But yeah, so all of my short stories, I think what they do have in common is that they center Black and Indigenous voices. And it could be a Western set in the 1880s. It could be, there's a story in here called Falling Bodies, which is actually it's a science fiction cross species adoption story of an Earth person, a human who's adopted by like an alien species. Uh, and I'm an adoptee, so that was like my first sort of foray into like trying to write a little bit about the like transracial adoption experience, for better or worse. And so I feel like all of my worlds, for me, for short fiction, sort of come to me from my experiences or contemporary experiences that do reflect our world. So they tend to be a little more like less, I think, on the fantasy aspects and more maybe on the maybe like post-apocalyptic for some of it. Maybe just a step away from reality, but not very far at all. So yeah, so I think I'm just pulling from all sorts of sources. There might be something in the news that catches my attention, and I want to, have some thoughts on that in my short fiction. So for me, in the short fiction process, it's a pretty immediate connection between our world and the world that I'm creating on the page.
Gwendolyn, how about you? Or Jennifer, yeah, please feel free.
Yeah, so the world that I was trying to create was Pittsburgh, of all things. But I mean, I was trying to recreate Pittsburgh in a speculative setting. And a lot of that happened from me wanting to reframe my childhood in Pittsburgh, which I didn't have the best childhood in Pittsburgh. But I thought, what if I came back to the city now that I'm an adult and I sort of reframed everything and saw the great things about Pittsburgh or the great things about growing up, and kind of exploded that. And then there's vampires and robots as well. But no, but so I think that in terms of like the cultural sort of or the political sort of juncture that it sits in, so Pittsburgh, at least it takes place in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and that was an interesting juncture for Pittsburgh because we were moving away from where the steel workers were working for us and all that stuff. We're moving away from that and the industrial sort of what am I trying to say? Is the industrial impression on the city. And we're moving into more futuristic tech hub, things like that. So we sit kind of in that sort of intersection. It's almost like its own third space. And the characters are almost living in a third space themselves. They're a marginalized group of folks. They're Black and Asian group. And they're not considered the forefront of the city, what the city would put front is saying this is Pittsburgh. And they're always aware of that, and they're pushing back against that through forming these communities and these tribes that sort of, inform each other. So yeah.
Yeah, and I consider myself a place writer, but I just love world building. It's so much fun, and I can build worlds all day and then never like write a story that takes place in them. Um, but world building, isn't just for speculative spaces and isn't just for speculative stories. And so I kind of had this interesting experience when I started writing this book of channeling the small town in Texas where my mother grew up and then lived in the later years in life. And so going back there and kind of like documenting the town and talking to family about how things had changed over time, it's just this really strange space of, trying to imagine small town Texas 70 years ago, but the stuff you're writing about, like nothing's changed, right? Like this, um, and it's just kind of an uncomfortable liminal space that is like really fun to build, but uncomfortable to be in. Um, and that was a new experience for me because I think a lot of the speculative world building I've done in the past hasn't been connected to my personal history, even if something in my personal life has given rise to like the substance of the story. So it's kind of just like place overlaid in place. And Texas is just a weird space. It's always been a weird space. It continues to be a weird space today. And so I think, I mean, it should be obvious to anybody who reads this book and anyone who knows me what my political ideology is, what my political leanings are. So I think that this book is probably very much a reflection of things that are still happening and that have not been addressed because people in positions of power are directing their energies to other actions, and it's really detrimental to a lot of communities.
I just wanted to mention, just totally random, Gwendolyn. I grew up in Texas too. I grew up in Fort Worth, not a small town, but but I have a short story in here set along 287. I don't know. It's like a freeway. It's like a two-lane freeway for people who don't know it. Cuts from Amarillo down to like the DFW area, and we used to drive it, all the time because I live in New Mexico now, and a lot of my family is in New Mexico, but I grew up in Texas. And I used to always imagine what was going on in all those small towns. And so I wrote like about cowboy vampires that come to a small Texas town and find a queer boy and offer him everything he ever wanted. Um, but anyway, I just thought that that was really interesting, like sort of the Texas connection. Very cool.
And we need more genre mashups. Like this is one of my
Yes.
my favorite things in creative writing class. I give an exercise. I list all these subgenres and I say pick two that don't go together. And now we're going to brainstorm story ideas for them. So I
I
just love
know. So
that.
like all the New Yorkers were like cowboy vampires, and I was like,
Of
yes.
course. Yeah.
That's awesome. My next question is, are there any characters in your books that stay with you to this day and that you hold particularly close to you? And it could be from your latest books, or even if there's another product of work that you're thinking of. Yeah. Jennifer, do you want to maybe start us off this time?
Yeah, sure. So on the subject of vampires, in Neon Steel, there's a short story that is about a vampire who wakes up and is no longer a vampire, and then how they navigate, once being a demon-ish thing. That's in the story, it's a demonish thing, and being a human. So that was an idea that I came up with again in high school. So and I wanted there to be a mixed group of people. I wanted there to be Black folks. I'm Afro-Latina. I want to be Afro-Latino folks as well. And I set it in this fictional town. But then, as an adult, I came back to that story. I'm like, there was something there. I don't know what it was, but there was some germ of an idea. So I tried to rewrite the entire story, and the main character is Shane, and then, there was a former priest who got excommunicated named Ferguson, and then there was a young woman named Paige who ran a coffee shop. And all those characters, I used to write about them in my notebooks when I was a kid over and over and over again. So then coming back to that as an adult and rewriting those characters, with what I know now, it was really fun. So those characters mean a lot to me, those specific ones.
Yeah, and I will pop in and say that this book was really weird because I when I started off writing it, I was obviously identifying, with Emily and with Candace. They were kind of at the forefront of my mind. There's a woman that comes to work for Emily and her mother, who is Cherokee Caucasian, and her and Emily kind of have this really interesting, distinct relationship. Um, but as the book started expanding, I actually found myself more and more um, invested in Mrs. Habermeyer, who is like this weird old lady. She is Gracie's aunt. And I was trying to process my mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis when I started writing this book. And Rebecca Habermeyer kind of like became a version of my mother as she was like forgetting things and trying to remember the past, but like losing it at the same time. Um, and so I remember reading through a draft of this when it was like a different book. This has been like 7 books, right? That's what happens. When you're learning how to be a plotter instead of a pantser, which I am still learning how to do. But there was a version of this where I was reading through it, and I was just like, it's weird how kind of characters kind of like cycle and come to the forefront of your mind. I think this is true with short story collections too, right? Um, and that just surprised me. I didn't think that this kind of tertiary character was going to be the one that stuck with me the most. But in that kind of weird auto-fictional way, processing what happens in our real life and then putting it into our writing. I think a lot about her. So I had to give her a happy ending. And in a different version of this book, she had a horrible first ending. And I thought, I can't do this. Feels awful for me. It feels awful for my characters. So yeah, she gets to have her happily ever after at the end.
It's nice. Isn't that kind of wild how a character, I think this is probably like, people always say this, like the character became its own person and it sort of took over the story. But it is kind of true sometimes, And I see that Isis asked me to talk about Shiala. So I will talk a little bit about Shiala as the character that sticks with me. Shiala is a mermaid. Well, she doesn't realize she's a mermaid for until a little into the story. But from my epic fantasy trilogy, Black Sun. And she comes from like an island that is all women. When they sort of capture sailors for reproduction purposes and then feed them to the sharks when they're done with them. And of course, they feed their sons to the sharks as well. But this is a whole nother story. Yeah, so what can I say about Shiala? I could talk a little bit about the process of creating her very briefly. I actually wrote Black Sun. That's the first book in that epic fantasy trilogy. I wrote a version, 90,000 words, very excited, gave it to my editor. What do you think? What do you think? It's my first epic fantasy. And he said, oh, it's okay. I was like, oh my God, it's okay. What do you mean it's okay? Like, talk about a freak out. So I took that book back because I do not do okay, and I tore it down to its basics. And the only character I kept from that first version was Shiala. And I knew she was like a hard drinking, hard loving sailor, she's bisexual. And she's just like going to be a badass, but also very sort of in touch. She had a journey to go on to get to where she is by the end of the trilogy. But she really sustained me through that rewrite. And so I rewrote the book from scratch, only keeping Shiala. And yeah, it turned out okay. But that was a lot. That was a lot.
Oh, that's so interesting. My last two questions, I feel like all of you have actually answered with your other answers, and I want to move into audience questions so we have time. And just so the audience knows, the last two questions were basically about anything that surprised you in your writing of these books, and then how your identities have influenced the stories. So I think you kind of naturally answered those questions. We do have two great questions in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and move over to those. So we have one question. How do you each navigate repping speculative fiction in literary spaces that often turn noses up at it? Does this kind of writing feel rooted in POC, queer, femme identity for any of you? And thanks for that question.
Could you repeat the question just for?
Yeah. How do you each navigate repping speculative fiction in literary spaces that often turn noses up at it? And does this kind of writing feel rooted in POC, queer, femme identity for any of you? And Isis put it in the chat too. Thanks.
I would say that, I think speculative fiction from the outset has always been a space to have political conversations that maybe couldn't quite happen in other places yet. And it's also a great place, right, to reimagine history or reimagine futures in ways that prioritize different groups. So yeah, I think that speculative fiction is a home and an origin point for a lot of marginalized groups. And I don't, I mean, I'm really curious to hear what Rebecca and Jennifer say about this, because I feel like when I was coming up through the academy, you're right, like it kind of stinks sometimes being like a writer that's been trained through university levels, because it shapes you in certain ways. Um, the first ever fiction workshop I was ever in, we couldn't write genre fiction. And that's why I switched to nonfiction for 3 of my degrees. I had a terrible experience in my first workshop. I wrote genre fiction for the final and I got a B in the class. Um, and, ever since then, like part of my language, but it's really irked me the way some people look at it. But also, I found just so many amazing people who are speculative fiction writers and readers. And it just kind of got to the point where, like, who gives a fuck? Like, we're going to write the stuff we want to write, and we're going to read the stuff we love to read, and we're going to share it with people who are excited about it. And I think it's really dumb for people to kind of like snub their noses at this, because there's a lot of enjoyment, a lot of happiness, a lot of productivity, and a lot of money happening in the speculative sphere. And I think that, people who aren't acknowledging the power and the popularity of speculative work, um, they just probably have a certain kind of background that asks them to prioritize different things, and they're missing out.
Yeah, I'll let Jennifer mostly answer that because I'm not affiliated with the Academy in any way. So that gives me a lot of freedom not to worry about categorization or not, fitting the mold of what a literary novel should look like. I am a commercial writer. I acknowledge that. And if I can bring Black and Indigenous and queer voices into the commercial realm and sell them and be on bestseller lists, then I think that's a win for everybody.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think about why because I thought about this question too, and I thought about why I go back to speculative fiction because I started writing it. I started as a fan fiction writer. Yeah. But I loved fan fiction. I wrote Sailor Moon fan fiction when I was 12 years old. I started my own website. It's called Planet Senshi, devoted to all of the Senshi characters. Sailor Jupiter was my favorite. And I wrote lots and lots of fan fiction, and I developed a little bit of a following. And then learned that I was writing to an audience. And I learned a lot from just, playing in this world that wasn't my own and also writing to an audience. So that was really helpful. And as I kept writing, all those little stories I read on the side, they were all speculative. And I kind of agree with Gwen that when you kind of get into the academic spaces, sometimes you feel pressure to write in a certain way. Whatever I write in the academic space, it's still what I want to write. I don't care. So, but at the same time, you do feel this sort of, that I think that I don't know if I would have been able to bring Neon Steel to the workshop. I think about that all the time. Would that have been something that I would have even been ready to give to the workshop? So I think that the academy can kind of shape things, but at the same time, I think that the fact that we have this wonderful event, we have these, that we were invited to this, great event with all these rock star writers, I think that it's showing that we're creating these spaces, regardless of anything. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much. I know we're at time. We have one more question, and it is directed to Gwendolyn, but open to everyone as well. Gwendolyn, now that the book is out there, do you find yourself having a specific reader in mind that you're hoping is picking up this book? Is that reader different now than who you wanted them to be while writing? Do you even hold the reader in your head when you're doing writing? And this is open to everyone as well. Isis also put the question in the chat, so you can reread it if you need to. It's 3 parts.
I'm actually kind of thinking about what Rebecca has said and what Jennifer has said. Because I think, being a commercial writer is also thinking about audience, right? It's a different audience, different need, different rhythm, different momentum. And as a writer, I think you always kind of have to balance, like, what story am I writing for me? And then how do I make that story marketable? Either to like a popular audience or an agent or an editor or whoever it is, right? Like small press. Um, and it's always kind of a battle, I think. And I'm remembering what Jennifer said at the beginning of the event, when it's sort of like, even if people just say something about your book, it may not be good, but right, they say something, it means they read it. I think that's kind of the space that I'm in, right? Like, I imagine that we're all grateful that people are engaging with our work. And maybe we hope there is someone who can learn from it. Maybe if anything, right? We just hope that a reader comes to this and gets inspiration or learns something or gets enjoyment out of it. But when you put your books out into the world, you lose control of them, right? Like, they become like their own thing, their own beast. They have their own lives. And I think that what you hope for them kind of sometimes has to get shelved almost, to let books have their own existence. And it's also okay that, like, some books, freaking take off, and some books don't. Like, you can't see my library over here, but like, I think a good, 70% of the fiction that I own is like just weird stuff I found at like the AWP book fair, right? That I adore and that I love. I saw a question in the chat about like what monsters we remember and we love. And um I have monsters from small presses. I have monsters from Big Five. I've got monsters from Tor.com. And so I think, if anything, like, maybe I would want the readers to turn into the kinds of people who are asking questions like that. Like, what would you recommend I read? Because at the end of the day, we're all just part of a big community, and we need to sustain that and support it. And readers who do that, I think, are pretty badass.
Thanks, Gwendolyn. Jennifer and Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that?
That was such a great answer that all you, Gwen.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great place to end.
Great. There was one additional question that came in about, as Gwendolyn mentioned, any favorite monster or unlikable character in someone else's spec fic. So Gwendolyn, thanks for answering that question. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. This was incredibly lovely. And that last question came from Emma Rosenbaum. I just want to shout her out. She's our acquisitions director and the editor of the Divining Season. Thanks for being here, Emma. Any closing words from any of our authors?
Can we plug our monsters really quick? I feel
Yeah,
like we have to
please.
do that now.
Yeah. So the full question is any favorite monster or unlikable character in someone else's spec fic work that you can recommend to us?
The first monster that came to mind for me, and there's so many good monsters. This is also something we do in the academy, right? We study monstrosity. I really love Jeanette Winterson's Frankenstein. If y'all have not read it, you need to read it. It is a kind of like dual retelling of Frankenstein, where we're looking at the initial creation of it and the weekend and everybody being together, but then there's also like a future reimagining of it. And I think that the doctor in that future reimagining is a really complicated, complex, kind of monstrous character. And so like that would be the book I would tell you to, if you haven't put it on your radar yet, put Frankenstein on your radar.
I love the vampires from Karen Russell's Vampires in the Lemon Grove. I love that collection. So I'd probably say that.
So my memory is so bad that I had to like pull up my Goodreads to be like, what have I read recently? What has monsters? Um, yeah, so I don't know if I can answer that question off the top of my head. I just read Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, which is kind of the literary side, actually, I guess. Which was interesting, not my usual read. But I would say that main character actually is sort of monstrous. She is very human, but she's missing something like empathy. So I'll pick her.
I'm glad you all answered that last question. Thank you. Well, thank you all again so much for being with us tonight. Thanks for everyone for attending and congratulations on your books. Please, for all the audience, please go buy their books or get them from your local library.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks,
again,
everyone.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Congratulations, everyone.
Thank y'all.